Welcome to Technical Leadership Talks, the podcast that brings you advice, insights, and knowledge from industry leaders and experts on how to navigate managing in a technical field. Technical Leadership Talks is brought to you by Texas A&M University's Master of Engineering Technical Management, an online graduate program that trains industry professionals for leadership positions. I'm Katie, METM's digital marketer and your host for this episode. In today's episode, METM Executive Associate Director and faculty member Ahmed Mahmoud interviews Kip Gary, the CEO of the Brock Group. They share insights and advice on how one can rise to their potential as a leader in their career.
Well, hello, Kip. How are you doing today?
Well, hello. Yeah, Ahmed, I'm doing good. How about yourself?
Not bad at all. Not bad at all. I'm really glad you were able to join us. I know your time is very valuable, but I think this will be a great session for our current students and our future students. So let me just start a little bit asking, give me a sense of what is your current role and what is it you do, and a small history of who you are and why we're interviewing you.
Yeah, happy to do that. Well, just to go way back, I'm a graduate at Texas A&M class of 82. I'm an electrical engineer. I didn't do much engineering work, though. I moved pretty quick into the business side. I worked for about 36 years with ExxonMobil, finished with Exxon's development company. I was an executive there negotiating new developments across North America, Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. Retired in 19, did some teaching and consulting, and currently I'm in what my wife calls my second failure to retire gig, running a company called Brock Group. So I'm the CEO of Brock. Brock is a labor services company that operates across North America. We're largely in refining, but we're in also pharmaceuticals, and we do work for Tesla and SpaceX and FedEx and Facebook and another big names that are out there. But we do softcraft services, scaffolding, painting, insulation, abatement, fireproofing, that kind of thing. And the way I describe our company is we've got 12,000 men and women somewhere across North America, from Miami to the Yukon, from Honolulu to Maine, somewhere across that space in North America, providing labor services every day. So that's a bit about me and who I was and who I am now.
Oh, wow. You said something interesting. You have an electrical engineering degree and you got into management. Can you give us a little bit sense of your career journey, your career through the years, and give us an insight a little bit, how can an electrical engineer become a CEO of a company?
Yeah, it's a fun story, I suppose. And interestingly enough, I tell my young son, he's a young electrical engineer from Texas A&M class of 20 with ExxonMobil, and the chairman of ExxonMobil, Darren Woods, is an electrical engineer from Texas A&M. So I tell my son, there's a big playground between you and his job. But just to thread the needle back onto my my experience, I did come out of Texas A&M in the early 80s, graduated in 82. And, when I did that, when I went into A&M, I should say, I had as my plan that I wanted to be in the field of digital electronics and computers. I had enjoyed that in high school. I did a science fair with a microprocessor, and I thought that was what I was going to do. But then when I graduated, my best job offer was actually with Exxon, doing work in the radio, microwave, and satellite field. And so although I loved digital electronics, that was a change of plans. It was not a particularly radical change of plans. I had been a ham radio operator since I was 15. And so it was not too difficult for me to say, well, I'll abandon digital electronics and computers and instead do radio, microwave, and satellite. And here's the thing. I love that work. I built systems across Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma. I worked across the Rockies. I worked all the way up into the Aleutian Islands of Alaska. But in 87, when I was just 27, I left it behind and I took a job in Exxon Fuels marketing, and I was a retail store territory manager. I was running gas stations. So it was my first, I'll say radical redefinition. And here's a surprising thing. I loved that too. And that change confirmed something that I knew intuitively about myself. I knew that my interests were generally what I call a mile wide. I like change. I like the thrill of a steep learning curve and entirely new opportunities. And, that change from doing radio, microwave, and satellite to running gas stations and enjoying both of those things kind of proved that point to what I kind of intuitively knew. And therein, I think, it lies at kind of an important point for young people. As you think about yourself, are you a mile wide, inch deep person, or are you a mile deep, inch wide person?
There's an interesting saying I heard years ago. It says, man plans, God laughs. So it sort of describes a little bit of, you graduate from school, you have all these ideas, and you end up completely not anywhere. I bet you ever imagine yourself, managing gas stations for Exxon with an electrical engineering degree, but it seemed like a great opportunity. Can you give me another story along these lines?
Yeah, and to that point, I go back up to Texas A&M on the DI Saturday. I spend time with 19 and 20-year-old freshmen and sophomores that are contemplating their degree choice. And I paint that picture of what I've done and said, 45 years ago, I was in your chair. Couldn't have imagined any of it. But I think another story that'll kind of flesh out what I mean by this mile wide, inch deep versus mile deep, inch wide is a story from back in 2005. By 2005, I had made multiple radical redefinitions of who I was and what I did. I went from running gas stations to managing a bulk fuels distribution business. Went from there to strategizing about Exxon's European natural gas business. And then I was selling liquefied natural gas from Indonesia to Japan and Korea. And I developed new oil and gas operations in places like Azerbaijan, the Russian Far East, Africa, and in the Middle East. And so in the summer of 2005, I was having dinner in Amsterdam with a guy named Dan. And Dan at that time was Exxon's leading geoscientist. He was working at a very senior level as a geoscientist. He'd been with Exxon 35 years, and every bit of it, 100% of it, had been in the field of geoscience. He was a geoscience consultant for Exxon, and he knew the subject of geoscience a mile deep, and it was all he'd ever done. And as he described his work over dinner, I thought, I'd have to shoot myself if that was my career. And then I described mine. And, he said the same thing. He said, I'd have to shoot myself if that was my career. And we laughed and we observed that, in a company, in the world generally, the world needs both these kinds of people. We need people that are mile wide, inch deep. We need people that are a mile deep, inch wide. And so importantly for young people, I think, is to know who you are and then gravitate to opportunities that fit that personality type.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of times as executives, you see people with a lot of potential, right? It's like all potential energy, and you need to convert that to kinetic energy, per se. What advice would you give new young employees to come close to achieving the potential you see in them? Sometimes us as executives, we see more potential in our people than sometimes they see in themselves. So if you could give me a little bit of insight of what you would say to them.
Yeah, Ahmed, and to go just a further step back from being an employee, I think first as being a student, having thought about what type of person you are, it can help chart your path forward. For a student that's contemplating degree choices, I think if you're passionately wanting to do a mile deep subject, like, for example, geoscience, then by all means pursue a degree in that field and even consider a master's degree or a PhD, to deepen your knowledge in that field. If you're, on the other hand, inclined to engineering work generally, but sense that you're more of a mile wide person, then I think going for one of the wider degree choices is a good decision. I think electrical engineering is really wide. I think mechanical engineering is really wide. I mean, just to contrast, if I were to say electrical engineering versus computing engineering versus computer science, I think you can see that from EE to CE to CS, you're looking at from a mile wide perspective to more of a mile deep perspective. And so once you've kind of made that first choice, you've made that degree choice, or if you've gone into a narrow one and then discovered you're actually a mile wide, well, what you need to do then is to figure out, how do I show up as an employee that's capable of working very hard? How do I be a good employee? As a great way to develop my potential in whichever of those two lines of a pursuit I want to pursue.
Well, that's an excellent point. Using your definition, what would you define as a good employee? What is it that you in your mind, what does a good employee look like?
Yeah, I think at the most basic level, a good employee is someone that's willing and able to deliver what I call good labor hour. What's a good labor hour? Well, we showed up and we got something valuable done for our company. The notional work week in the U.S., it's a 40-hour week. And knowing that, each of us can ask ourselves, are we delivering? And of course, over a long career, there's going to be times when we have to run hard. Perhaps 80 hours a week, is something that we have to do from time to time. And then there's other times when we know we can walk a bit. And knowing that, it's incumbent on each of us to self-regulate and to deliver the product for which we're getting paid. Beyond that, I think a good employee is someone that's flexible. I think a good employee is curious about others' views. A good employee is a student always seeking to learn, willing to be a mentee to a more experienced employee, and willing to be a mentor to a less experienced employee. And importantly, I think a good employee is also someone that has centered her life on principles. I'm thinking here things like integrity, fairness, honesty, service, curiosity, politeness, patience, perseverance, just to name a few. And so whether you aspire for a career that's in formal leadership management type roles or whether you aspire to be a respected leader in an individual capacity, the best way to get there is, I think, first and foremost, to strive to be a quality employee.
That's very interesting. You said something quite interesting in opening yourselves up for opportunities. Give me a sense of, because it seems like you opened yourselves up to opportunities you never expected. Can you give a little bit of insight and advice to employees why they should open themselves up to things that they might not have thought of?
Yeah, as I mentioned at the onset, I could have never planned my career. I couldn't have imagined it. And so it's so fun to talk to these 19 and 20-year-olds and say, 45 years ago, I couldn't have imagined any of it. So what might your potential be? When I was in that job as a retail store territory manager, I remember thinking that, maybe one day I could be Exxon's Dallas area district manager. That really wasn't actually a big move. That was like the next level up. But it does say something about the limitations of my imagination, of my own potential. And I'll say this, despite having had that limited potential or limited perspective of my potential, one thing I did do well, I think, and did do right was that I said yes to opportunities as they came my way. For 36 years with ExxonMobil, I said I would go anywhere and that I would do any job. And that simple choice to be open to opportunities and willing to say yes took me to more than 30 countries. It took me to job experiences I couldn't have imagined. And, I'll say this also, it wasn't always easy. It did require making trade-offs. But that said, I wouldn't change a thing. I think that you create for yourself the potential for good opportunities when you work hard, when you learn, when you make good choices. And if you learn well how to learn, and then you choose to be a lifelong student with a diverse range of interests, and then importantly, you choose to say yes to opportunities, I think you'll find that your value continually increases and even more interesting opportunities will tend to come your way. And, I'll say a final point about that. I didn't love every job I ever had. I didn't love every work location I ever worked in, but I did learn and I did grow my potential with every new role in which I performed and succeeded.
Now, give me a sense of what role does self-esteem play on being a good employee? What does an employee need to think of himself or herself? Is that important? And if so, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question. It may not be an obvious one, but here's what I think. When we think about, am I being a good employee, then sometimes our self-esteem is something that needs to be tuned up, perhaps. Sometimes if we have a bad day, and we all will have a bad day a time or two, our self-esteem may take a hit. Certainly, when you work across a long career, I'm now, over 45 years of work, 50 if I go back to when I was picking apples as a teenager. We're going to have good days and bad days. And as I think about that, I think that companies at their core, well, they're frankly impersonal financial machines. They do, though, have some culture. They have their own culture, and sometimes they're more person-friendly, and sometimes they're, I would say, less person-friendly. The company culture may be that of a baseball club. If you don't perform without errors on the field, if you can't keep your batting average up, you're going to get traded off the team. That's a baseball club culture. Other companies may be more like, a country club culture. You may be a low performer, but unless you've done something immoral or illegal, you remain a member in good standing. And company cultures can be sticky. You may not be able to materially influence your company's culture, but you can control how you show up. And so when I think about the subject of self-esteem, one of the things I said for many years across my working life was that every morning when you go to work, bring your self-esteem with you. And I know that may sound strange, bring your self-esteem with you. I mean, after all, how could someone else give us our self-esteem? But all too often, the esteem we have for ourselves derives from how we perceive that others perceive us. And if we're inclined to low self-esteem, then no matter how people actually perceive us, we receive their interactions with us as indication of their low esteem about us. And knowing that, when you look in the mirror, choose to see yourself as you are, not as you imagine others may see you. Importantly, I think you got to be honest about what you see. If you see certain weaknesses, work on those. If you see bad habits, work on forming better habits. If you've been given feedback and you see in the mirror that it's true and valid, accept that gift of feedback. And then importantly, decide one of your core principles and stand on those. Then each morning, as you head out the door, take your self-esteem with you.
Excellent points. That's very good. Now, what about for employees as they're working in a company, they feel they're doing well, they're rising very quickly, and then all of a sudden they feel like they're hitting some ceiling, in their current jobs, and they feel like they're not moving along as fast as they would like, or where they're not achieving the potential they think they should be moving to.
Yeah, it's a real challenge. We all work a lot over a lot of years, and sometimes it feels like we're moving forward, and sometimes it feels we're stuck in place. I've had that feeling in a number of jobs over the years, and I know many others that have as well. I think for young people, millennials, Gen Xers, I think the workplace today is actually quite a bit different from when I grew up. In many ways, I think it's actually easier than it's ever been to develop our capacity for good work and to create good opportunities for ourselves. The internet wasn't around when I started. Online learning, remote degree programs like the Masters of Engineering Technical Management program that is such a quality program. These give people today the ability to enhance their ability to learn and add skills. Also on the internet, you got tools like LinkedIn that increase our ability to see opportunities and, importantly, to be seen. Just a few thoughts that kind of come to my mind as I think about that. Every day, if we strive to deliver a good work day, we choose to be a student always and curious always, and then we network, then those will help us to gain our potential and not feel like we're getting stuck.
Yeah, that's good advice. What about, it happens. We've seen it in our careers and in companies where you feel like this company or the organization you're in just does not have the opportunity that you're looking for. All right. That, not every organization can handle all the rock stars they might have. What advice would you give to folks that feel like, I love this company, but it just doesn't feel like it will be able to support me in what I want to do and what I want to achieve?
Yeah, Ahmed, that comes right to this theme I have of finding our potential. And a quick story about that. I was in Kodiak, Alaska back in the oil spill days of 1989. I'd gone out to Kodiak with 3 other guys because the oil was going there, and we went there to get ahead of it and get ready. And the oil did come to Kodiak, and I built a radio system across all of the island. And one of my colleagues, a guy named Rob, he wound up running an aircraft operation. We had 2 fixed-wing aircraft, one going to Valdez, one going to Anchorage. We had 5 helicopters. And this guy, Rob's running this aircraft business. And one day he said to me, Kip, one day this is all going to end, and we're going to have to go back to our regular job. And I said, yeah, what is your regular job? He said, well, I'm a draftsman in the production department. And I thought, wow. At 29, I thought, that guy has potential the company's never going to tap. And it's kind of forever framed my view about the fact that we have potential that we may not even be aware of. Here's what I think. If you find yourself stuck, either the company's not moving forward or they're not moving you forward within it, I think it's important to recognize that every day that you go to work at that company, it should be a choice that you made. And if you feel like you've got no choice, then you're just really not in a great place. I think there's nothing wrong with testing the market for our services. A couple of times in my 36 years with Exxon, I did test my alternatives on the market, and I decided to stay at Exxon. And having made that decision, I felt empowered that it was my choice. I also sought to cultivate opportunities within the company. And, with some success, I was able to move and kind of keep fresh, if you will, what I was doing over a long career. If you do test your alternatives, well, here's the thing. You may find a better opportunity, and then you can own that choice. You may find that the opportunity you're currently in is actually just fine. And importantly, having looked, you can feel good about that choice to come to work at that company each day. I think cradle-to-grave careers are still a feature of work in many companies, and I think it's actually a pretty good way to have a career. And I also know that employee loyalty to companies and companies' loyalty to employees is generally in decline. And so I think it's good to be aware of our alternatives. It's probably as important as it's ever been to think through what I could do if I didn't come to work at my current company this morning.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. But I want you now to take a different perspective. Think of you as being the leader of the company. We just gave people this advice. What can we do to make sure we create a work environment that will enable our employees to rise and reach their potential? Because, as you know, turnover is an expensive proposition. And the more we give the great talent that work in these companies to stay and do well, will be better for everybody. Can you give a sense of what you can do as a leader to make the opportunities available to your employees?
I think it's first and foremost a matter of leaders recognizing that the people working for them probably have more potential than they realize. And then second, recognizing there's going to be a really big need. To that point, I'm giving a talk later this week at the American Federation of Petroleum Manufacturers conference in San Antonio, and I was looking at some demographics. And here's what I learned. Looking at just the last 12 years, we can see that total employment in oil and gas, the industry I work in now, the largest cohort of employees has shifted dramatically in the past 12 years downward to 30 years of age from 50 just a few years ago. So just, 12 years ago, the average age was, 45 to 55, 50 years old, and now it's 30. And, we lingering boomers and we late Gen Xers may be thinking, how's that going to work out? But I would note that every generation has always worried about the younger generation. Even Aristotle, 1,700 years ago, was lamenting the problems with youth. But, just look around the world we're in today. I mean, the quality of life, our access to quality food, our living conditions, our medical care, technology that we simply take for granted, sitting over the Atlantic Ocean, coming back from Europe last week with my Wi-Fi going so I could send some email from 35,000 feet. What a world we live in. So the better view is that each generation is different. I mean, if each generation is getting worse and somehow we're failing up in spite of it, the reality is each generation is just different. And therefore, the simple answer to when are these young kids going to grow out of it is, well, they're not going to, and it's going to be okay. Another observation about demographics is the U.S. birth rate is currently 1.6 babies per female, and the population replacement rate is like 2.2. And so that means here in the U.S., we're not replacing our population. So recognizing these demographic trends, a couple of things at least come to my mind. One, we're going to continue to see a more diverse population in the workplace by virtue of immigration. And two, young people are going to find themselves getting into formal and informal leadership roles sooner, and they'll have to get better at it faster than we did. And for us leaders, recognizing these trends, it's important, therefore, to invest deeply in developing our employees. And importantly, I think very importantly, to care deeply about our employees because they have choices and they are smart enough to go check their alternatives. And so if we develop them and we care deeply about them, and then we consider that they've got potential that we haven't thought of, well, that can frame our whole mindset to our leadership. We can choose to adopt a mindset that every one of our employees probably has untapped potential that we've not yet realized, and how do I make that potential become real?
That's excellent advice. Is there any last thoughts you might have you'd like to share to our listeners?
Yeah, sure. Just let me indulge me one more story. I'm a bit of a storyteller, so I could probably go on for an hour, but just one more story. In '96, I went to work in Exxon's natural gas business in Europe, and it's a far different business from the refined fuels business that I had been familiar with. The methane molecule is fairly simple. But it's as a business, the natural gas business is quite complex. It's enough to make your head spin. And when I joined this organization and once again stepped into my discomfort onto another steep learning curve in a radical redefinition of who I was, I encountered an older Norwegian near retirement. His name was Odd. And Odd was a bit odd. And he'd spent his entire career in Exxon's natural gas business. He was one of these mile deep guys. He knew everything about the business, and he wouldn't give me the time of day. And I thought, how odd. This guy's going to soon retire. And when he walks out the door, he's going to take everything he's ever learned with him. And I determined right then not to be odd. So my point to people, whether they're older in their career or mid-career or just getting started, across your career, and particularly when you get in that group that's maybe 10 to 15 years after retirement, or at least one of your retirements in my case, how will you be remembered? Who's going to be talking about you 20 years from now? And what will they say? Will they be talking about a guy named Odd? Or will they be talking about someone that was just this amazing mentor, an amazing developer of my talent and my potential?
Thank you for listening in to today's episode. Tech Leadership Talks is brought to you by Texas A&M University's Master of Engineering Technical Management. To learn more, visit metm.tamu.edu.